Hello and welcome to The Big Picture. India's relations with the African continent has been a historical and civilizational one. In the recent years, these ties have been sought to be reinforced with deeper economic and strategic relationship. The India-Africa Summit, which began in 2008 under the previous UPA government, has seen 3 summits, last one being held in India in October last year. Prime Minister Narendra Modi, as a follow-up, is now on his first continental visit to 4 of the countries: Mozambique, South Africa, Tanzania and Kenya. These visits are being looked at keenly as India hopes to deepen its ties and play a major role in the continent. Meanwhile, these visits have also acquired importance following the recent strain in the relations between some of the African countries following the attacks on Africans in India. So we'll today look at the Prime Minister's visit, what it is trying to achieve and where the India-Africa ties are heading. To discuss this, I have with me Rajiv, Bhatia, former ambassador, Prof. Sriram, Chaulia, Dean, OP Jindal University, Sanjay, Kapoor, editor, Hardnews, and Pramit Chaudhuri, consulting editor, Hindustan Times. Welcome to all of you. Mr. Bhatia, what is the vision as far as India is concerned when it comes to Africa?
The vision is becoming clearer. The vision is, first of all, of consolidation and expansion of close political relationship between India and Africa. Secondly, it is about intensifying the economic relationship in a manner that it becomes mutually beneficial. A subset of that also is the intensification of development partnership. But beyond this, I think one can also say that the vision includes very much a focus on the Indian Ocean related issues, security and development. And at the end of the day, it is also about people-to-people relationship and cultural cooperation between India and a region which is the natural habitat for India, that is the African continent.
Sriram, this foundation which has been there as far as the ties between India and Africa is concerned, historical, civilizational. But for years it did not take the shape which it should have. In the last few years, maybe in the last 7, 8, 10 years, that India has started refocusing on Africa. How far has India been able to make headway?
The refocus is related to our economic growth and positioning this relationship in a 21st century framework. So while we pay, we always recall the historical sacrifices we made together for freedom and going back in time, it's important that we now find new bases on which the relationship can flourish. And to some extent, because most of Africa is semi-industrialized and so is India, and now we are on the path to industrialization, there is a greater complementarity that's emerging. So our need for African resources is going to grow, and simultaneously as Ambassador Bhatia mentioned, the African bloc is huge in the United Nations and we need those votes. And then on top of all of it, there is this sense that India is rising and we need to have an influence in Africa. We need to have a set of followers from Africa behind us if we have to establish ourselves as a leading power as Prime Minister Modi wants. So for all these reasons, I think we are making an effort. I think it's being accelerated in the last couple of years under Prime Minister Modi. There was a time when hardly any Indian leader was even visiting Africa or individual African countries. So he's trying to make up for a lot of the deficit and showing that, South-South cooperation is not just about technical nitty-gritty. At the end of the day, it's about rising together, both sides.
Sanjay, rising together, what is said is India has been a little laggard in the way it has dealt with Africa. China is way ahead as far as the making inroads into that entire continent is concerned. Are we in a position now to catch up?
I think it's a wrong way to look at India's relationship with Africa. We should not see it from the prism of China galloping there. We've had a very old relationship geographically. If you look at it, there have been trade which has been taking place. So much of Gujarati traders have been coming, settling down in East Africa. And, a person like Mr. Narendra Modi's DNA comes very easy to comprehend what really is to do business with Africa. So I don't think this is a recent thing. You would probably say that we probably are looking at countries which we didn't. But if you recall, When it comes to the African National Congress, India was deeply embedded in their entire freedom struggle. Then Indian National Congress, led by Jawaharlal Nehru, passed resolution. They had an Africa policy at that point of time. So Africa has been very important, and whichever way you look at it, I mean, if you look at South Africa and India, they were working and dealing with each other since 1994. You had the first cricket team which came from South Africa and played a match in Jawaharlal Nehru Stadium, which I also happened to see. And there were so many other things that happened when South Africa was able to kick off apartheid. So I would not say that it is something that has happened recently, but in terms of larger economic engagement, it has actually risen primarily because we had the money to invest. Primarily in the early days, we did not have the money to invest, but after post-liberalization, when India began to look better, 2006, 2007 onwards, then you had earlier Prime Minister Mr. Manmohan Singh giving credit lines in the last Africa Summit in Addis Ababa, about $5 billion. Prime Minister Modi has actually built on that. He's increased it in the last India-Africa Summit that took place in Delhi. He bounced it to about $10 billion. So it's a process. It doesn't really happen that, suddenly you decide that you are going to do it. Surely, I mean, in terms of the push, the PM has done it. You had the Vice President who visited Africa. You had the President who was here, now the Prime Minister. And this is larger, it is greater. I think the focus is more to get influence, more to get support for UN reforms, and even for the nuclear suppliers group. I mean, the interaction the Prime Minister is going to have with Mr. President Zuma is to garner support in the nuclear suppliers group, in which our claim for membership was rebuffed. So there are many, many things that the PM is seeking to achieve, and he's in great hurry because you also have the president. He knows that the US presidency of Mr. Obama, who's made many assurances on his last legs, although it's a lame duck presidency, but he hopes to achieve a lot out of that. So there are, I think, a certain urgency that you can see in the last few months.
Pramit, how do you look at this? Sanjay says that let's not look at India-Africa ties, especially the economic ties which is growing now through the prism of China. Is that way? Is that how you will also look at it?
Well, ultimately, our relationship with Africa will run independently of China. China is there in the back of our minds, and it is also there in the back of the minds of a lot of the African countries. Some of these countries, for example, Sudan, gave us a share in an oil field which was controlled largely by China because they didn't want China to have a 100% share in the oil field. This is also the case in other countries like Nigeria, where they've come to us and said, we don't want to be all of our resources controlled by one country. So therefore, it does help us that there is this China issue. We had one candidate, or the president of Zambia actually ran on a violently anti-China platform. He says the Chinese are investing, taking over, but they're bringing in their workers, giving us no jobs. And the beneficiary of that was Vedanta. Vedanta was allowed to take over large chunks of the Zambian copper industry, to the point that Anil Agarwal was asked about his investment in Zambia, and he says Vedanta is 26% of Zambia's entire GDP. So we have definitely benefited, but yes, the bulk of what we are doing in Africa is something that is running on its own steam. And at the core of this, I would argue, is the rise of Indian private sector investment. While there is, of course, a large amount of state-owned enterprises, PSUs investing, especially in the oil and gas industry, it's going to, nowadays when you visit a lot of African countries, like for example, I went to South Sudan on its day of independence, my phone was Airtel when I landed there. It was Tata Mahindra vehicles that were carrying me around. The entire leadership of South Sudan had all been flown to Apollo or Indian hospitals during the Civil War when they were sick. It was Maratha infantry soldiers who were maintaining law and order in Juba. All the way across, you could see the elements of India on a whole host of fronts. It was no longer just about the government of India or even the PSUs. That relationship is expanding across a lot of areas. And that's not driven by China. That's something that Indian commercial interests, and there's a convergence now between our commercial interests and Africa. And it's important to realize it's not just, and this is a very big difference between us and China, we are not resource driven. A lot of the Indian investment going into Africa is not about resources anymore. It is about financial services, it is about telecom, it is about hospitals, it is about education. The bulk of the 50% of all the global FDI into Africa nowadays is in services. It's not into resources anymore. That's a big misnomer about what modern Africa is about. Resources is big, but it's now a major service economy. And that is exactly what India is competitive in.
Okay.
We are a services-driven economy.
So, Mr. Bhatia, isn't India interested in the resources which is there in Africa? Or to what extent are we interested?
No, I'll give you a very clear and straight answer. I think there is no doubt that India is interested in resources of Africa. There is no reason why we should not be, because that is very much one of the major strengths of Africa. The essential approach of India is that it is not purely or nakedly extractive. The idea is that we help Africa to mine its resources, we help them to do the value addition, we help them to create employment, and then they help us by sharing whatever they can share with India. And this is, I think, a very enlightened approach. And if you allow me, I also want to just say that
I am asking this question, sorry to intervene, because there are certain criticism that what is happening in Africa now, whether there's some kind of a neo-colonialism happening there.
Well, you see, I don't particularly see any reason why we need to highlight or showcase that criticism. That is a very subtle, indirect criticism probably done either by some Western experts or by someone else.
So you are saying that the Africans themselves don't feel like that?
No, this is exactly what I'm saying. I think, first of all, my 2 points. Number one, let's be very clear. Africa is not going to make a choice. Africa needs all its major partners, which means 2 major partners from Asia that we are discussing, India and China. It also needs, in its own fashion, America, European Union in spite of the Brexit, Japan, Turkey, Russia as well. They don't have to make any choice. But in this matrix of their partners, India has very obvious attractions and India has very obvious strengths. What has happened now, we see the continuation of the India's Africa policy. What we are seeing now is India is addressing the major deficit in political visibility in Africa. This was missing. This is now being upscaled. And on top of that, India is willing to share much more of its financial resources and human development resources than India was willing to do in the past.
Okay, Sriram, as far as the visit of the Prime Minister now, of course, he has gone to, he's in South Africa, he's been to Mozambique, he's going to Kenya and Tanzania. But has South Africa always overtaken or overshadowed other countries as far as, the way India looks at Africa?
Well, it certainly attracted the most bulk of our investment and is our #1 trading partner. And of course, it's also a major economy. It's the second largest after Nigeria in the whole continent. Plus, it's on the Indian Ocean, and we have Mahatma Gandhi, Nelson Mandela, and all those connections. So it does loom large. But I think we have diversified over time. We are buying, oil from a number of other countries. Of course, minerals-wise, South Africa is quite rich. But so is Angola, so is the Congo, so is Tanzania, so is Mozambique. So I think if you look at it that way, over time, other African economies will start galloping. And then we will see that they will, even West Africa, which is further away from our shores on the other end, towards the Atlantic, even that, we have started tapping in a big way, Ghana, Nigeria, and so on. So I think it's not a case of over-dependence on South Africa anymore. But South Africa we look up to because of the BRICS formation, because of IPSA, and because it's been, vocal about changing the global order, making it more multipolar, which we share with them. So in fact, today Prime Minister mentioned that there is a possibility that South Africa and India could partner in co-production in defense. This would be the first time. We are also working with South Africa in building the peacekeeping capacities of African governments across the region. South Africa has a convening power. If you go to Pretoria, you will find that most of these civil servants, militaries, bureaucrats across the continent are coming there for trainings. And so through South Africa, it can be a gateway for us to be able to build our human capacity agenda in the whole of Africa.
Okay. Sanjay? Sanjay, as far as what has happened in the recent past, the very sorry incidents which we have witnessed in India, the attacks on Africans, and how much of a shadow will it be casting on the Prime Ministers too, you think? You think that will be an issue which will be discussed? I would like Mr. Bhatia also to
you know,
on this.
I think, I write for some South African newspapers, and I found that the great amount of pressure on me to write on the violence that had been done on the Congolese, primarily because, when we describe Africa, we describe it as one entity. We don't, make it granular or separate it as, a national from, say, Nigeria or Ghana or that kind of thing. So if an incident takes place against one African, the message goes that, the entire Africa has been brutalized in certain ways. So I think if there is a press conference, somebody will surely raise a question about that. But if there is interaction, maybe the South African or other countries may not raise it. But I think Government of India is cognizant of the problems that any kind of violence on an African national in India, because you have a counter, you can say, violence which takes place in the respective countries. It has happened time and again. It happened even this time when the Congolese was hit. Prior, there were incidents against the Malawis. So every time something happens. So if you want to forge a closer ties, if you want to come closer to them, we have to be very sure that no harm, nothing really visits them, because in the world of social media, things travel so rapidly that you cannot.
Well, I think I've dealt with a lot of these issues, as you know, when I served as your High Commissioner, both in Kenya and also South Africa. Whether or not the South Africans or other African countries raise this, whether or not there is pressure from the media of the continent, I think it is incumbent on us to do the correct thing. And I hope that whatever has been promised will be carried forward to its logical conclusion.
What is it that they would expect?
Well, they would expect India to show its faith in Atithi Devo Bhava, that it is Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. When an African student, businessman, diplomat, visitor comes to India, he has to be not merely given a safe environment, he has to be given a respectful and friendly environment. I think our authorities know about it. It is now a question of changing the mindset of our countrymen.
Pramit?
Well, I will say that first, I don't think the government has changed its mentality. After the last attack, we saw Foreign Minister Sushma Swaraj claim that, one, the attacks were not racist, and second, that the Indians were not racist against Africans, both of which are complete rubbish. Indians are racist, and if you talk to any African living in India, even children, they are perpetually harassed by Indians. They are abused in the streets. They are just harassed by police. You saw the Aam Aadmi Party, when it began its campaign, openly targeting Africans as a means to win votes. The Indian government is simply in denial if it goes around making these ridiculous statements. And that's the first step they have to make, is to admit, yes, these attacks were racist, and we have a racism problem in this country. I mean, we attacked the Australians for saying exactly the same thing when Indians were attacked. And then when the shoe is on our foot, we immediately do exactly the same thing.
No, but so what kind of pressure you think it will be there during this visit?
I don't know. At this level, at government to government level, at head of state meeting, normally you don't raise the bad stuff. This is what the ambassadors, but you talk to African ambassadors in India, all of them say this. They say, you have a racism problem and you will not address it. You will not address it because your political leadership continues to deny that it's even happening. And that's simply untrue. I mean, you forget about the street level. They are not going to change at the street level if they're listening to the political leadership of the country saying, oh, we're not racist. And that's just nonsense. It's nonsense. There's no evidence of this.
Just saying that there was already an indication available from the previous VVIP visits, that is the Vice President and President when they were there in both tours, which covered, as you know, 5 countries. As far as we can see, going by the information in the public domain, this issue did not cast any dark shadows on our dialogue. I suspect that that is what mostly would happen in this tour as well.
Hindustan as well. But the shadow will be there somewhere at the back.
We have to address the color bias,
Yeah, it is there
in
at
our
the back of
society,
our mind.
and also, rediscover the historical links. Because what's happened is, after the non-aligned phase was over, as you said, there's been a disconnect. So the generation that is now out with the racist bias and attacking Africans, they don't know about how we benefit from Africa. So hopefully, Mr. Modi's travels and all this emphasis on Africa and building the cooperation and all the publicity that comes along with it will educate the public. What is lacking is the level of education at our school curricula and in the minds of young Indians. Most average Indians don't know how attractive Africa is and how it belies the Western stereotypes of a starving and a destabilized and a war-prone continent. There are many parts of Africa that are galloping, and the demographic dividend, all those things. So we need to actually put out a positive image of Africa, and hopefully the Prime Minister's travels and all will help galvanize that, because that's ultimately how you re-educate the public.
Absolutely. Sanjay?
Yeah, if you remember the meeting that all these African ambassadors organized, one of the things that they demanded from the government of India is to raise awareness about Africa, to fight the stereotype that drives people to violence. And that is where I think the challenge lies. It's that the government of India needs to work hard.
And the point Pramit
We have
was
to
making.
stop being in denial. Stop being in denial.
Stop being in denial. Coming back to the relations, Mr. Bhatia. One of the things which we have been reading about is that the extent to which Indians are going there for contract farming, buying up land, tens of thousands of crores is being spent there. You think that is the right approach? You think that is where the government should be encouraging Indians to go there and farm there?
I think there is definitely a new trend now. Whatever may have happened in the past in regard to Ethiopia, etc., I think there is a growing awareness that land is a very sensitive issue.
Right.
That if you go into Africa and buy or lease land, it has its very serious implications. So I think, judging by what they have just secured in Mozambique, the new model where India would extend financial and technological help to Mozambique people to do the commercial farming, and this is backed by buyback arrangements of the production, in this case of pulses. This seems to me a very positive and balanced approach, and I think this probably can be replicated elsewhere, because Africa has land, Africa has water, and Africa has very, very fertile environment for the kind of things that may be needed by India.
Pramit?
Yeah, I mean, in fact, if Ambassador Bhatia would know as well, I suspect we do a very similar thing in Myanmar, which is another major source exporter of dal, where we buy from Myanmar farmers rather than Indian farmers working there. And so, yes, exactly. It's a win-win situation for the African farmer, gets a guaranteed market for his product. We get a steady supply of dal, dal has become a major inflation problem in India, because it is the primary source of protein for vegetarians population and for poor people. But dal has become a luxury product in this country. And we import from Australia, from Canada, from America, from Myanmar. We're desperate because we simply cannot match the demand that we have in this country for this product.
Apart from dal, what is it that India is looking forward to from these countries which the Prime Minister is visiting? One of the things which was being said was about Indian Ocean, the strategic importance of it. Is there a lot of focus on this?
Yeah, the last year's India-Africa summit, one of the crucial elements, the shifts that happened, was the introduction of a very large security element to this. We have become more active in, for example, helping African countries fight Boko Haram or Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, which are the two big international terrorist networks that are functioning in Africa. We even provided millions of dollars to Mali, a country that we don't have much of a relationship with otherwise, to help them train and prepare and fight the Al-Qaeda there. We signed, I think, over a dozen security and military agreements in the last summit. And in Mozambique, we are training their intelligence service, we are training their navy. We have now resurrected an old defense agreement, which now means that we will also help their military across the board. And Modi has specifically chosen 4 Indian Ocean littoral states. And as you've mentioned earlier, we are now we are developing a larger Indian Ocean strategy in which we are trying to build up linkages that go beyond just the normal historical and cultural relations, but move them into economics and security because we've seen what's happened to China what's happened to the South China Sea, where China essentially declared suddenly that an international water body is ours. And we watched Southeast Asia crumble, Southeast Asia unable to resist Chinese pressure. And so the sense now in the Indian system, when you talk to them, we have to build up at least a network of influence in Indian Ocean. Not that we'll ever stop China from coming in, that's not the point. But we have to be able to show that Indian Ocean is still India's ocean, which is something the Chinese have publicly said is not the case, that Indian Ocean will never be yours.
This is interesting, this strategic importance.
I think certainly this has been there for a long time. Maybe it has got a little sharper focus. But if you were to take strategic...
What is the kind of resistance which we will face in this when we are going ahead in this strategy?
Well, I mean, you know, obviously there is a geopolitical factor which is very obvious. We are going to do a kind of a catch-up. But I think, you know, in the immediate future, in the next 2-3 years, this may not change suddenly. The power balance does not change suddenly. But what is changing is something that we need to appreciate, which is that in the past, India used to have just 1 or 2 gateways in Africa. In the olden times, Kenya, then it became Nigeria. South Africa always fancied itself as a gateway. Now, thanks to very active and constructive and creative diplomacy, India has acquired several gateways into Africa. When Vice President Hamid Ansari went, Morocco offered to be one. Ghana, when the president went there. Now, Mozambique is another gateway. So, I think India is developing elbow room, additional elbow room for itself on the holistic way, in the holistic way. And I think this is a positive trend.
Sanjay? So, you know, where are we heading now? After,
I mean, clearly, you know, one aspect...
because Prime Minister, 4 countries, there's 50 odd countries in Africa.
I would
still
come
a
back,
lot.
yeah, I mean, I would come back to the point that I raised, that is the enlargement and influence. The economic side is very important, but at the moment we are not an economy where we can give a lot of money to African countries. You go there and you realize that they like credit lines, they like India to fund many projects, but I don't think we are in a position to do so much. So as of now, we are looking for support on the nuclear suppliers group, which is going to come up later in November. South Africa, we had a discussion. President Zuma hasn't spoken very much on that. So we are not very sure whether he's going to commit. So similarly, on the Security Council issue, the reform of Security Council, we need support from Africa because our issues are the same, because we don't have representation in the Security Council. We want it to be reformed. So those are the issues which will also being talked about, because economy is fine, but here again, when it comes to global architecture, we need to figure
very
somewhere.
quickly. Sriram.
I'll mention 2 things. We are touching the lives of ordinary Africans, building their livelihoods, their capacities. That is where we stand out. And second thing, a lot of African countries are democratizing. And that is where India is special. Among all the developing countries, we are the most successful case of our established democracy. So electoral assistance, constitutionalism, federalism, you know, drafting of rights and charters, all these things. This is where
we can actually be a role model for some of the countries.
Political development of Africa.
Okay.
I hope a humble one.
A humble one.
Of course.
Okay, on that note, we need to end. The fact is that India will be playing a very key role in that continent, and that is something which we'll be looking forward to. Thanks to all my guests. Please keep watching. We'll come back with another issue, the big picture, same time on Monday. Meanwhile, have a great weekend.